Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Spirits and Ghost Stories. I'm your host, Thomas Aarons.
And I'm Carly Bird.
Week 25. We are past the 6-month place and we're still going strong. This is absolutely amazing to me. Big week for us. This is a fun story that I teased about a little bit at the live stream. If you guys actually listen to the live stream, you know what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
But before we kind of get into all that, Carly, how you been?
I've been okay, Tom. Finally getting back to the gym after having COVID. Took me a while for my body to get back to its normal state where I felt like it could actually work out without just being dead for the rest of the day. So I'm really happy about that. My birthday is coming up here soon, and that's kind of
She will be
exciting.
turning 18
Oh my gosh.
in 48 hours.
Oh my
Sweet
gosh.
18.
He
Congratulations.
continues to think I haven't even hit my 20s yet. He'll forever think I am a teenager, and I love you for it.
Let me know in the comment section below. Is it better to think that they actually gain age as they get older, or to say that they never age? Please let me know that. Carly, what are we drinking tonight?
Tonight, we are drinking your tried and true Hornitos tequila. And to be honest, we thought about adding something to it, but we were kind of just going with straight tequila and some lime and a little bit of seltzer water.
Yeah.
And we didn't go over the top today. And I'm really sorry, but we did go over the top for your story. So never fear.
Yeah, so here's the boogie. We have a lot going on. I'm about to start my final semester of my MBA program, and then I graduate. Carly is working her butt off because I'm making no money right now. And we're also trying to actually be healthier and not drink as much. And are we failing? Yes. Are we failing
Yes.
miserably? No.
No.
We're cut back a lot, but it's not, it's like playing a game and it's like you lose the game, but it's very close. And that's kind of how it feels right now. So we're not buying any more alcohol. So we are using what we have up right now.
We're using the rest of we're
And
not going out and spending more money
I
on
know.
other alcohol.
And a lot of people are like, well, but this is called Spirits and Ghost Stories. Guys, we'll get back to drinking. We're just taking a month off, probably.
Right.
Relax. It's fine. It's fine. You want us around for a while. But what we lack in the spiritual beverages, we're going to make up in the quality content. Guys, Thomas Aarons is back in the saddle. Tommy had a story. And when Tommy has a story, he delivers. He looks hard. He gets hard. And he makes sure that all is unearthed. I have spent 3 weeks with this information, getting you the most historical, up-to-date stuff that I could possibly do without being paid to do it. And that's what we got here today. Today is my show to an extent. I'll be telling one story, but then the lovely bird here will be telling another. To add to that, I'll be starting us off with really some backdrop, the atmosphere, setting the stage for what we're getting into.
All
And we're
right.
going to do a little old school retro history channel stuff here, guys. We are going to be talking about today Appalachian cryptids. Huge shout out to Dan Cummins at Time Suck. He did Appalachian cryptids, and this really is what tickled my pickle about learning about one of these creatures.
That's a podcast, by the way, for those of you who aren't familiar with Time Suck.
Yeah.
Dan Cummins, one of Tommy's favorite podcasts ever. We've listened to all of them, I believe, together, and we try to
100%, yeah.
stay up to date. It's really nice to when we go out on weekends to go to wineries and things like that. We always turn on one of the Time Suck podcasts.
And his is extremely in depth. Anyway, long story short, he's the one that really made me delve into this specific topic that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
And so with Appalachian cryptids, we're going to be talking about one specific cryptid. And cryptid is a monster or an otherworldly creature.
Thank you for defining that.
This creature is called the Snallygaster.
Dun, dun, dun.
Appalachian cryptid. Today we're going to be talking about the Snallygaster. But before we really dive into the creature, I really think to do this story justice, you have to understand the back history, the lore, the culture that this thing was created in.
Okay.
And to do that, we really have to talk about Appalachia. And what is Appalachia? And for most people out there that weren't growing up here, like Carly and I actually have, we are actually considered, based on my research, we are Appalachians.
We're Appalachians?
Yeah, we're Appalachians. I really wish this was a live stream. My God, I wish to just have my mom and Caroline on this. But yeah, we're considered Appalachian. And so that really comes from, so let's get down to it. With Appalachian culture, which we're going to get into Appalachian culture, the meaning behind Appalachia, the people, everything. We're going to go through all that before we get into the story because it really paints a picture of how fantastic this is and where it came from. But first, we need to where did the word Appalachia come from? Well, it actually came from the Spanish conquistadors that came up into Florida way back in the 16th century. The Spanish conquistadors named the area above Florida Appalachia. So, in of itself, Appalachia actually refers to anything above Tallahassee, Florida.
That's funny.
But then that's what the name comes from. The area of Appalachia that we know of today now consists of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, and parts of New York.
Holy moly.
Basically following that spinal cord of the Appalachian mountain ranges.
Okay.
Which is just, to me, is amazing. There are 4 ways of how to pronounce the word Appalachia, believe it or not. And I looked at it
Wait.
online.
Can I try?
There is literally YouTube, like ways, like you could, like, you know how you ever click on YouTube, guys, like say like, oh, how do you say this word?
How do you pronounce
There's
the word?
different ways.
Right.
And this is what I'm going to do. Instead of getting into that long thing, we're going to do this. Google it yourselves if you're interested. It's fascinating because basically the way you pronounce Appalachia, if you're like a historian based on this,
Yeah.
dictates what region of Appalachia you're from.
That's funny.
Which is interesting
Yeah.
because, again, it comes back to that culture. But that's very important because it really symbolizes if you're an outsider or not. If you don't speak with the right lingo, people immediately know, depending on where you are, that you're an outsider.
I literally want to guess all 4 of the ways you pronounce
Maybe
it.
we'll get into that. But to get into it a little bit more, Appalachia, as we know it, is not just a place, but it's a culture. And we really need to get into like what created this culture. And one part of it is like it's extremely remote. How remote is the Appalachian area? This place is extremely isolated. Based on a 2014 New York Times Insider article, quote, how isolated these counties are, there is not 1 mile of 4-lane highway in McDowell County, West Virginia. Towns are often a row of 2 or 3 houses slotted alongside the road at a valley bottom. A 50-mile trip, as the crow flies, could last 3.5 hours.
What?
Driving.
For 50 miles?
For 50
3.5 hours?
This is in the heart of Appalachia, and this article was done in 2014.
Whoa.
Add a little bit more. California became a state in 1850, and for the most part, it was more modernized than parts of Appalachia. And if you think, for your non-historical people out there, like the East Coast was actually settled first. So the point is, we bypassed Appalachia, went all the way to California, got shot by Indians, modernized that city, and then came back.
Yeah.
And still Appalachia wasn't completely modernized. Let me add to that a little bit more. Not only was California going through these growths, with many parts of Appalachia didn't receive modern amenities until after World War II.
What?
So there are parts, now if you guys remember this, which is a fantastic movie called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is a musical, it took place in the South, and parts of it were Appalachia, where you saw parts of it where they didn't have running water or electricity.
Right.
They had like 1 radio tower, and that was like super fancy. That's all real. And there are parts of Appalachia that are so untapped because of its topography. If you guys are not familiar with the area here, our mountain's not necessarily steep, but it's very broad and remote. And so to get into some of these valleys and hollers, as they were, it does take a great deal of work. And so that really kind of is a nice little stitch up of like Appalachia as a whole. It's a mountain range. It starts from Georgia. It goes all the way up to New York. It's very broad, very, very remote. But you think there's a little bit more to it than that. Appalachia is also super duper poor. And this kind of gets with that remoteness.
Is that why it took so long to modernize everything?
It's a chicken or the egg thing. And we're going to actually get into it here. The Appalachia region is one of the poorest regions in the United States. One of the main poverty issues of Appalachia stems from the fact that the employed population of these states makes significantly lower amounts of money than the rest of the U.S. In 2014, the per capita income of Appalachia region of Kentucky and the whole surrounding area was $30,000 a year, while the entire USA average was 46.
Okay.
Appalachia is poor. It's remote. It has a lot of resources. And some other people get into different kind of arguments with this about like, because there's so many natural resources that like retard its growth. It's not being able to grow up as much. You have these big industries like coal mining, gas, fracking. I guess it's what, forestry, I believe, where you collect lumber.
Mhm.
You have all these natural ways to make a living, and that also leads to the idea that it's not very educated, because in Appalachia you don't have to go to college to get a degree
More like
necessarily.
manual labor versus
Exactly. You can make all this money right out of high school.
yeah,
Like, why would you? But it's also a cultural thing,
right.
and that's very important.
Interesting.
So we have a population, to kind of set the stage, that's very isolated, very remote in the woods, with a group of people that in general are used to being isolated in remote areas, and they lack advanced education, and they're very constricted to the area they're in. But now let's kind of meet the people of Appalachia. I think this part here is very important. Move past my notes. Now we could get into the Native Americans and things like that, and there were a couple of tribes like the Cherokee that have been part of this land forever, dating back all the way to the Spanish Canadian shores, but they were in more of the southern south region. And then you have the others like the Susquehanna tribes, which is part of the Susquehanna Valley, which is up in PA. We're close to where we are right now. These tribes have been there for like 400 plus years before Americans, or I guess colonizers, actually came in. But then from that, it's when the colonizers came that we really get into the meat of it today.
Okay.
So the first people that we're going to actually talk about here are the Germans, the Pennsylvania Dutch. The German immigrants, who are often referred to as Dutch because they came from Deutschland, Germany, were a group that had huge influence in Appalachian culture. They primarily settled in the Pennsylvania, Virginia area, bringing with them food such as apple butter and this is a German word. I'm going to try to have a pronunciation right here. Sauerkraut, a traditional chicken corn cabbage dish. Their culture identity was super strong, that they didn't assimilate very well into regular American culture. And then to this day, there are still pockets of these people that only speak German still. German schools, German churches, German culture.
Only German?
Yep, only German. So to this day, you can find it. Appalachian alpine towns such as Little Switzerland, North Carolina, and Helen, Georgia. But the Germans were treated considerably less harshly in America than the Scots Irish and the Italian immigrants. But we're going to get into them a little bit later.
Okay.
As these people came in here, they formed these pockets because they were German and they kept their cultural integrity intact, and they didn't assimilate. What do you get? You get isolated people with their own cultures in the mountains, being able to develop and grow and evolve without being touched by outside influences.
Yeah.
And this helps with the mythology that comes in Appalachia. And this gets us to our main people, the Scots Irish. About 90% of Appalachia settlers in the 18th and 19th centuries were Scotch Irish, aka descendants of the Ulster Protestants, whose ancestors had immigrated to Northern Ireland from Scottish lowlands and then to the Americas. Many had been supporters of William of Orange, the Protestant king of Scotland, England, and Ireland, who was effectively known as King Billy amongst the Scots. When former King James II invaded Ireland in 1689, William's followers, known as Billy Boys, you see where this is coming? Hid out in the forest along the hills for sneak attacks upon the enemies. When their ancestors came to America, New England was already full of British settlers. So the hillbillies settled in the wilderness of Appalachian mountain ranges. And that's where hillbillies, that's one of the originations for hillbillies. So it came back to just this idea of, again, that old country, all this old country stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean old country, like the old world, which would be Ireland, England, Scotland. It's that culture from there that came over and was transplanted, and then it evolved on its own.
Yeah.
But they settled in the wilderness of the Appalachian mountain ranges. Many started out in Virginia and North Carolina, eventually spreading into northern Georgia, eastern Tennessee, Kentucky. But their main niche was West Virginia, parts of southern Maryland, Virginia. That's their bread and butter area. So we need to know a little bit more about these people. In Appalachian culture, stereotypes such as like family loyalty, rebellion against authority, passion for self-defense gave rise to this image of hillbillies as wild mountain men. But you have to understand, like, this is the culture of the Scotch Irish. It's us against the world. It's this tribal clansman mentality.
Mhm.
Most of them actually, what was the primary thing, guys? If you know this from any kind of movie like the Quiet Man, it's sheep herders, it's goat herders. Why is this important? Because to be a caretaker of those types of animals, it has a very much a tribal mentality to protect them. You're out on your own in very bad grazing areas compared to like cattle. You're out in the mountain ranges, you're always over the sheep. And you're very protective over your tribe. This creates a very isolistic mentality.
Okay.
So example, like if you're a sheep herder, you don't have fences. You roam. And so you develop that tribal instinct because you and your family are just taking care of the sheep, and you move from place to place to place,
Right.
protecting your grazing rights.
Right.
This will come up again when the Scots Irish go out west because cattle farmers are different. They fence them in. This is ours. Whereas this sheep herder or goat herder mentality of like, no, you just go wherever you go, and you're very protective over it
Mhm.
more so. That's very important.
Okay.
Another part of this culture. So now we understand that like we have the Scotch Irish who are very tribalistic, it's us against the world. We're going to put them in a remote place. Then we need to add one more element to this, and that is the Celtic influence.
Okay.
So the Scotch Irish brought the Celtic mythology with them, which is great storytelling over a millennium. Now, the Celts were one of the major powers in Europe before Roman Empire came in and pushed them to the edges of basically at that time modern civilization, which was England, Scotland, and Ireland. Well, then Rome took over England, but they pushed them all the way to the brink of Scots Irish area and Ireland's mainland itself. That to this day is the only places that really the Celtic mythology, but the Celtic history is still known.
Okay.
Even though that was the last place the Celts actually migrated to and developed their culture, the Romans were so good at genocide, they were able to wipe out their culture everywhere else. But all those tales, Celtic tales, which we talked about earlier in some episodes, the banshee, elves,
Mhm.
leprechauns,
Mhm.
all that was actually European culture. That's where the Celts originally came from. And they took that with them to Scotland and it evolved. And they took that with them to Ireland and it evolved. And then through telling of tales, they took that with them to America. So now we have a better picture going forward into this story, really about this idea of the Snallygaster, that this is based on an area of the United States that is very isolated, very proud of its isolation
Mhm.
because the people are proud,
Mhm.
coming from a people that are very good at telling stories, that have this culture of
Like deep roots.
deep roots of
Yeah.
mythological creatures. These are the same people that believe in the, like, not just they believe, but they create a tale of the banshee,
Mhm.
of fairies,
Right.
of all these very I want to say like Nordic gods, but paganistic gods.
Yeah.
The idea of Halloween being this paganistic thing,
Right.
that is a Celtic mythology.
Right.
The idea of a sun god, like this is they're very in touch with the woods and the environment they're in.
Mhm.
That's Celtic, which is embedded now with the Scots Irish. Now all this is taken over to Appalachia.
Okay.
So now you're taking this people that's very proud of their paganistic rituals, which is fine, bringing it over here to this new world, this very rugged area,
Mhm.
and they're able to develop their own mythological creatures. And with that, we kind of set the stage to really get into what the heck is the Snallygaster. Well, for centuries, it was, from eyewitness accounts, it was a large winged beast known as, of course, the Snallygaster, and is said to have terrified the people of Frederick County, Maryland, in particular, for a great deal of time. But it also was seen in Greater Appalachia itself. So a lot of the sightings were around Frederick County, Maryland, Hagerstown, Maryland, but it was also seen in the Greater Appalachian area. It is a dragon-like beast, and it is described as half reptile, half bird that lives deep in the caves of the South Mountains. The South Mountains basically are any mountains southwest of Frederick, Maryland. So basically, Appalachia itself. Now, I'm going to pause that real quick, and then because we have the screen up here, I'm going to throw this up on the old screen. What this sucker looks like, because I bet all of you guys are pretty curious, like what the heck this thing looks like.
Anytime I read a description of what the Snallygaster looks like, I always think of like a turkey buzzard.
Yes, and we're going to get in that too.
You know, because it's supposedly, like that picture there looks like it's got feathers on its head, but supposedly it's bald, is what I've heard. That it's got like a bald head like a turkey buzzard does.
And for the people that are listening to podcasts at home, what we have on the screen is basically a picture of the time of what the Snallygaster looks like.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it could be a turkey buzzard, it could be a large eagle or a hawk.
Right. So that the head of this creature that Tom has on the screen here for our listeners looks like it has the head of an eagle, but the eagle has like fangs, actual teeth sticking out of its beak, and then it's got a long feathered neck that is attached to a body that is like the second half of its body literally looks like a T-Rex. With big wings on either side. No like little like little T-Rex arms, none of that.
And they were terrified of this thing because apparently it would take ding 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 livestock, sheep, goats. It would take them away and suck them dry.
Okay.
It would either devour them in some stories, or it would like be very vampiric and actually drain them of their blood. It would also snatch people and was dangerous to people. But a lot of the stories were around it's eating livestock, which is very interesting.
So this thing must be massive then.
Yes. But again, I think it's interesting now that we've set the stage of like, this is like a tribal people that are used to raising goats and sheep, creating a story now.
Protect their livestock.
Yep. And it's a creature that specifically goes after them. And now you can tell with this thing, honestly, too, you can see the Celtic influence, like that old world knights versus dragons type of thing. And it's so crazy because you think of a creature like this in like West Virginia, you think, where'd this come from? But now you understand the people and their heritage. It makes sense. This looks like a dragon that a knight would slay. Yeah. But it comes from that mythology. I think that's just so
half dinosaur, half bird. Literally.
Yes, it's a dragon. Yeah. It's almost like a dragon.
Yeah.
So I thought that was freaking like cool to me. Yeah, it just all clicks for me. Like it just all now makes sense a little bit more about once you understand the back history of like, well, how do this doesn't make any sense. It's like so crazy. They're so drunk or they're drinking too much moonshine. Like, no, it's a cultural story basically. And they're taking those cultural elements that they probably had for like what, like generation, 100 years, and now they're putting this all together. So it's basically a dragon. So anyway, the Snallygaster is like a dragon-like beast.
Yeah.
And it's described as half reptile, half bird, lives deep in the caves of the mountains of Appalachia. The mysterious creature is said to swoop silently down from the sky, stealing farm animals and children from unsuspecting farm folk. Some say it's real. The area was settled by German immigrants beginning in the 1730s, who called the creature a Snallygeist, meaning quick spirit in German.
Oh.
The earliest folklore mixes the half-bird features with nightmarish features of a demon or a ghoul. Other depictions describe the beast as half reptile, half bird, with a metallic-like beak lined with razor-sharp teeth.
Oh.
Sometimes it is described as having octopus-like tentacles protruding from its mouth. The earliest stories claim that the monster sucked the blood of its victims.
Okay.
A February 1909 article claimed that a man had been seized by the winged creature, which proceeded to sink its teeth into his jugular and drain the body of blood before dropping it along a hillside. The story was carried prominently in the Middletown, Maryland's Valley Registry and soon spread far and wide, so much so that the Smithsonian Institute of Washington, D.C. offered a reward for the hide, and U.S. President at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, reportedly considered postponing an international trip to potentially hunt the Snallygaster.
What?
Could you imagine Joe Biden or Donald Trump like stopping what they're doing to go hunt a cryptid?
I can imagine Donald Trump stopping to go hunt a cryptid.
But like, like I'm just, I tried to use both Republican and Democrat there, but like the idea
I know what you tried to
like,
do, but let's be honest, it would be Trump that stops what he's doing.
I would find it.
Biden would be like, what? What are we talking about?
For years, the Snallygaster lived only on the pages of folklore. Only on pages of folklore until 1909, when the story of this beast began to appear in the newspapers. Encounters between local residents and the winged creature in February and March of 1909 described it as having enormous wings, a long pointed bill, claw-like steel hooks, and an eye in the center of its forehead.
Ew.
Furthermore, it was said to make a shriek like a locomotive whistling. A February 1909 article claimed that a man had been seized by the winged creature.
What year?
Hmm?
What year was this? When was it seized?
1909.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought. Still 1909. Okay.
Seized by the winged creature and devoured in front of his family.
Ooh.
I know, right? In the earliest issues, the flying beast seemed to be everywhere at once. In New Jersey, it was reported that its footprints were first discovered in the snow. In West Virginia, it was said that the flying beast almost caught a woman near Scrabble. Was found roosting in a farm's barn and laid an egg the size of a barrel near Sharpsburg.
Sharpsburg is like right on the corner.
Near Sharpsburg, a man in Cowston, Ohio, wrote a letter to the Valley Registry telling of strange creatures that flew over his area, making terrible screeching noises. He described it as having 2 huge wings, a large horny head, and tall 20-foot-long wingspan. In Maryland, it was first sighted by a man who operated a brick-burning kiln near Cumberland, Maryland.
Say that again. Who operated a what?
He made bricks.
Okay.
A man who made bricks in Cumberland, Maryland spotted the fucking thing. As he recites, as he recalls, he's dead, so I guess he recites. As he recites, when I awoke, it emitted a blood-curdling scream and angrily flew away. It was also slow down, Tom. It was when I stumbled upon it, it emitted a blood-curdling scream and it angrily flew away. It was also sighted near Hagerstown, Maryland, south of Middletown, at Lover's Leap, and seen flying over the mountains between Gapsland and Burkesville, where it was reported to have laid another very large egg. The last sighting was in Frederick County, Maryland, occurring in March of 1909, where 3 men fought the creature outside a railroad station for nearly an hour before chasing it into the woods of Carroll County. This is definitely a Maryland, West Virginia thing. Just fighting a massive demon bird.
Just fight it for an hour, for a whole hour, and nobody
and no one ever done it. Like, yeah, boy, hi, we're gonna get in the goddamn woods right there in the holler, get Bob Bowden
into the woods.
I can see your brothers with shotguns going after this thing.
Yeah, they would do that.
Afterwards, there were no more sightings of the mysterious creature for the next 23 years, at which time it once again appeared in Frederick County, Maryland. The first report said the bird was seen just below South Mountain in Washington County. Something about Washington County. Something about that mountain. It was surmised at the time that as the life expectancy of a Snallygaster was unknown, maybe 20 years, 30 years, the new sighting had to have been from the offspring of the creature of 1909. At this time, the Middletown Valley Register requested that local residents who spied the creature should provide an accurate and detailed description, as accurate description as possible for scientific purposes. 2 residents soon reported having seen it just east of Braddock Heights, flying about 25 feet overhead, confirming the description published the previous week. The next thing heard of the Snallygaster is that it had died in Washington County when it was overcome by the fumes of a moonshine still and fell from the sky into a 2,500-gallon vat of moonshine.
Of course, it would die in a vat of moonshine.
So that really sets the tale for us, like this creature. And then honestly, and because I really wanted to so we usually do this new segment called Scary Things in the News, but it's kind of fitting because this is part of the news. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but this right here is the news clipping that I have.
Oh, no way. Do they have pictures of the Snallygaster?
Mhm.
It doesn't look like it. In that clipping there.
So can you see it though? So
It's a drawing.
well, this right here is actually the news clipping.
It's cute.
There it is.
It's
Perfect.
a cute clipping.
Look at that.
See, look at these old little fogies.
You have the Snallygaster flying over top.
Yeah, it's a drawing of a Snallygaster. Looks
in
like
the
it's
sky.
flying over a train.
Look, 3 old men with shotguns.
Yeah.
Like that's Larry, Eddie, and Michael right there
Oh my
going after it.
gosh.
In 1909 sightings, in the 1909 sighting article that ran in the Middletown Valley Registry newspaper was scenes and incidents of the Snallygaster rain. So this is actually a news clipping. This is freaking wild. This is a thing that people thought we should post.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know. That to me is freaking cool. But this kind of gets us in. Now that we know the history, we know the culture that created this creature. We know Appalachian of itself. And now we know why this creature now makes a lot more sense than beforehand. I hope for the audience, that's listening to this, like it all makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
It's that old world Celtic mythology brought by the Scots Irish and the German over here into this rural area where it evolved.
Yeah.
And that's the tale for our first story. Carly?
All right. Prepare yourself for the sighting of the Snallygaster.
Oh boy.
I want to tell you a story about the only person I know who believes in that old Snallygaster hocus pocus. Her name is Anna. You'd like her. Everyone who meets her likes her. She's just that kind of person. If we're ever in Washington, D.C. together, I'll have to introduce you. Anna is a climber. I mean, yes, she is ambitious and capable, but she's an actual climber, a rock climbing enthusiast. That's kind of how her story gets started. She moved to D.C. from one of those states out west that's just one continuous mountain, where rock climbing is practically part of your daily commute. She jumped right into a really stressful job in D.C., and it wasn't long before she found herself craving the release that she'd always found from climbing. Now, people come to D.C. for all kinds of reasons. To serve their country, to serve their cause, to serve themselves, but folks don't exactly move here for the rock climbing. There are some great climbing gyms in the area, but Anna wanted something different.
Mm-hmm.
Something that offered her more of the solitude she had known on some of her favorite routes back home. She found what she was looking for not far from here. It was a big old barn, all by itself on the back 40 of some property owned by a friend's family. It had a great big spacious interior crisscrossed with beams and posts and a loft and old platforms. It was love at first sight for Anna. She'd helped build climbing walls before, and this was going to be a masterpiece. Her friend's family didn't use the barn for anything, and were only very happy to let Anna turn it into her own personal climbing getaway.
Wow. Very nice of them.
Barely an hour from the city. I know, right? Anna's the kind of person where the harder she works, the more energy she seems to get. Well, Anna's DC job just got crazier and crazier, and the barn got the benefit of it. Anna cleaned and painted and renovated it in an unbelievable pace. And you know how big old buildings with dim interiors can feel spooky when you're inside all alone? But Anna only had one strange incident during that time. One thing that made her stop and wonder. She was up at the top of the barn on a funny platform that runs right under the peak of the roof. She'd never been up there before, but it was a job accessing that little loft, raising and leaning a long aluminum ladder just right. The ladder creaked and wobbled under her as she made the ascent. She poked her head up into the dim space and pulled it back so quickly she'd almost startled herself off the ladder.
Wow.
There was a dead pigeon on the edge of the platform.
Well, that's suspicious.
Right in front of her face as she'd looked in. She pushed it gingerly aside and climbed up. It was a strange, uncomfortable space, lit by a large open doorway to nowhere at the front of the barn, basically a hayloft, just under the eaves. It was not quite tall enough to stand in, with the roof beam down the middle of the braces to duck under every few feet. The floor was covered with dust and a few centuries of things left by birds and rodents. Ew. Anna walked gingerly down the length of the platform, testing the boards ahead of her as she went. When she got to the doorway at the end, she cringed a bit as she laid on her stomach in the mess on the floor.
Ugh.
Then reached down the outer face of the barn with a little crowbar to complete her task. Nailed to the siding just below her was an ugly old metal star that had blood red rust stains all down the face of the barn. Any painting she planned to do would be wasted as long as that star was still up there, just waiting to bleed ugly streaks down her work after the first rain or two. She got the crowbar under a corner of the star and began to work it loose. She expected the thing to come off in pieces, but after a little prying, the whole star came free.
Oh, wow.
She reached a hand down and pulled it off the barn, brought it into the platform, and looked it over. The star was very old, that was clear. The nails that held it together on the wall were square and hand-forged. The whole thing had the rough, strong construction of an old village blacksmith's job. The front had been painted over many times, but the back left her hands stained red with rust. As she sat there idly examining the star, she noticed something strange about the platform itself. There were marks, old gouges on the floor of the platform that she had taken for tool marks. But as she walked across the boards, the barn was old enough that all the timbers would have been hewn and sawn by hand. So where did those tool marks come from? But up close, she could see that these weren't the kind of traces left behind by a saw or any other tool. They were deep, narrow marks, some of them straight, but others crooked and haphazard. Well, the gouges were old and dust covered. Whatever had made them was long gone. It didn't seem to matter anymore. Old buildings had lives of their own, and the mystery of those marks would either reveal themselves or not. Anna didn't give it much thought at the time. It seemed a shame to throw the ugly old star away, so she left it on the high platform right beside the access hole. There was no chance of it being in the way, as she assumed that she would probably never find herself up there again. That assumption was wrong. And it was right about then that the dreams started.
Dreams.
It was a dream she kept having. Very simple and clear, and she always remembered it when she woke up. In her dream, she was climbing, as hard and as fast as she could, but climbing toward something she loathed and feared. Something she never wanted to reach. If she slowed for even a second, a hand or foothold would crumble away, and she would have to scramble and lunge for the next one. It was like she was out climbing a landslide, but one that only happened when she tried to slow down.
Interesting.
Every time she came back to the dream, she could tell somehow that she was higher, closer to that terrible something at the top of the climb. She also began to sleepwalk, too.
That's never good.
In the way that terrified her. The night air would wake her up, standing in the front door of her apartment with her car keys in her hand, about to go. Where? Somewhere she knew she didn't want to go. She didn't connect any of this with the barn, because she only had the dream when she was in the city. In fact, she started to spend more and more weekend nights camped out at the barn, because she found that she always slept so deeply and dreamlessly there. Maybe it was the fresh night air. The summer nights were balmy, and she'd pull her little pickup inside the barn, set up a little sleeping area in the bed of the truck. She thought it was very cozy, and she didn't mind the occasional rustle and flutter of the other creatures that called the barn home. Anyway, she always fell asleep so fast she'd hardly noticed it. I remember talking to Anna at that time and worrying about her a little. She told me about her dream and her sleepwalking and general exhaustion, but insisted that she made up for it all of those times during her weekends in the country. One night out there, she said, was worth a week of tossing and turning in her apartment. She felt great, she said, and she said it was with such conviction that I believed her, but she didn't look great. Over the course of the summer, she had begun to look more and more unwell, like she was wasting away.
What the heck?
At the time, I figured all of the work was just wearing her down. I have a different theory now. But anyway, just as fall began, I talked her into at least taking a few days off, just tearing herself away from it all and getting out of town, going someplace to get a little rest. So she packed up and she went to camp out at the barn. As a change of pace, she brought a little tent with her and pitched it in the field outside the barn on the edge of a little grove of trees. When the night came, it was clear, with just a sliver of moon. Anna remembers looking over at the barn before she turned in for the night. She noticed the contrast that the black doors and windows made in the moonlight reflected off the new white paint. She took a deep breath of the cool, fresh air with that lingering smells of grasses and trees and knew that she would sleep deeply out here, away from all that hustle and worry of the city. And Anna did sleep deeply, very deeply. But the dream had followed her to the country this time, more urgent and terrifying than before. It almost felt painful, she said, as painful as a dream could ever feel.
What?
Like she was being stretched apart in her own mind. And when she slept-walked, to this day, she's thankful that she made the trip by herself. Because how terrifying would it be to see a friend of yours sit up abruptly from a dead sleep, rise, walk to the nearest wall, and start climbing? That was evidently what Anna did. She walked into the barn and climbed. She must have done some of the most difficult climbing of her life, since she managed without a ladder to reach that lonely loft right up near the peak of the roof. She began to awaken. Not awaken, but her memory picks up with her walking slowly down the platform toward the dark doorway, stooping a bit to avoid the massive roof beam. Her bare feet crunching and sliding over the filth of the floor. She was conscious of where she was and where she was going, but unable to stop herself.
Jesus.
Steadily she progressed. There was nothing she could do but go to that doorway. And she dreaded it. She took her last steps. She stood at the doorway, looking out over the empty fields below, blue and indistinct in the full moonlight. She stared and waited, and nothing happened. She began to awaken more fully now until she was completely herself. The feeling of dread had faded with consciousness, and now she was just standing at the peak of the old barn, perplexed, breathing heavily, filled with relief, and wondering how she had got there and how she was going to get down. The last thing she expected was the head of the Snallygaster to suddenly appear at the doorway. It took her an instant to notice. The head was down at the level of her knees, as if the thing were climbing to the front of the barn now. It was the movement of the thing that caught her eyes. And when she looked down, the head was moving frantically, quivering and twitching and grimacing, with 1,000 constant tiny motions. The head and the neck of the thing were completely bald, like a vulture. But the pale skin of the face covered the beak and allowed the thing to snarl and grimace, almost as though it had lips. It had teeth. She could see its teeth. Great, big, black ones that snapped together with a sound so enormous it was like the clashing of two giant steel plates being dropped on one another. Anna screamed and fell into the mess of the floor on the platform. She scrambled backward, and the thing began to climb into the window, its large, dark body making a pale head and neck stand out horribly for an instant. It opened its mouth impossibly wide, and its whole head shook with the force of its scream, a scream that almost deafened her, but that she somehow knew only existed in her head. A scream that was silent to the rest of the world. And then the bulk of the Snallygaster's body lurched into the window and filled it, blocking out the moonlight entirely.
Wow.
She scrambled back further and further, and she heard the scrape of the thing's claws across the platform as it pursued her. She knew the entry hole to the platform was behind her somewhere, and she knew that if she kept going this way, she was bound to fall through it.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't care. Anything was better than staying here to face this creature. She crab walked backwards until one hand, reaching out for more floor, found only empty air beneath it. She crashed down on her back and skinned her arm, landing on something. On that old iron star she had pulled off the wall. She snatched it up and flung it at the advancing creature, then rolled over on her belly and began feeling all around, outside the entryway, feeling for a handhold that she could swing to. She didn't find one, but after a while she realized that the creature hadn't grabbed her up either. She didn't hear it. Didn't hear its claws scraping the boards anymore. Slowly she turned her head and looked back down the platform behind her. There was nothing there. Just moonlight streaming through the open doorway, and the old iron star, propped strangely upright by a couple of its old nails, silhouetted against the blank night sky. Morning revealed two things. The first was fresh gouges in the planks of the platform that Anna was on, fresh gouges that matched the old dust-covered ones that had been there that she had wondered about. Gouges that led from the doorway up to within a foot or two from where she had been lying beside the entry hole. The other thing that morning revealed was a cross beam near the entry that Anna could use as a handhold to begin her descent from the platform. It was a precarious route to the safety of the barn floor, but Anna's a very good climber. As for the Snallygaster, well, if you ask about it, Anna will tell you that it was just a dream. It must have been. Just a sleepwalker's nightmare. Her subconscious manifesting some old folklore that she must have read about in college and then forgotten. The gouges were maybe the rats gnawing on the wood for some reason. Who knows? She links the whole experience to overwork and too much stress. And she's found a lot of ways to relax and balance her life better now. Most weekends, you'll still find her out the barn, climbing. You can't miss the barn. It's the big white one just back from the road, the one with a 7-pointed star nailed right up beneath the eaves. And Anna wears a little matching star on a thin gold chain around her neck. Nothing to do with superstition, she says. She just likes the way it looks. And that was the story of the Snallygaster.
That's a really nice psychological drama. Was it in her head? Was it not in her head? I like the description of the creature.
Me too.
How the fuck, like, she just like sleepwalks and like she literally has sleep apnea and so many other issues.
I know.
Why does she like go places by herself?
Well,
she needs like people with her.
Yeah, she should have taken her friend. Like,
yeah.
Also, where was the friend that encouraged her to get out of town?
Yeah.
Why was the friend like, hey, you should get out of town and go alone?
What kind of friend would do that?
I know.
Now, that wasn't as dark as mine. Because whereas yours is more like the supernatural type of vibe and everything, mine kind of happened.
Yeah.
Mine delves with not just the things that happen in your mind at night, but real things actually go bump at night.
Right.
Are you guys ready? Time now for the tale. It comes at night.
Ooh.
I live in a rural place and in a heavy wooded area. I've always felt totally safe in the woods
every night, walking about outside, getting some chores done, no problem. I'm not really a skeptic. I do not believe in paranormal things or cryptids or anything of those natures. I've never had an experience until that one night. Regardless, I still always try to find the most logical explanation. We live in the backwoods of Maryland, up on the border of West Virginia.
Uh-oh.
My dad, my granddad, we come from a legacy of coal miners. We live in one of those places that would be perfect for a John Denver song, with lyrics that start with Country Road and maybe ends with Take Me Home.
Maybe.
I don't often feel scared or I get unraveled when I go up, down into the holler, or up to pick wild oats. However, this really freaked me out. This experience really made me believe or question a lot of my beliefs. So this was a few weeks ago. My parents had gone to bed, but I wanted to stay up late. So I settled into the living room to read. Our living room has these giant windows, almost covering the entire wall. I left the blinds open and turned on one lamp and sat right by the window. My elderly dog, who had been let out already to go to the bathroom for the night, was on her way back inside. But then she started pacing by the house and barking and wouldn't settle down. The hair on her neck stood up and she let out this very low bellow, growl, and hum. I called out to her, "Daisy, what's wrong?" And she turned to me with this almost pale expression, her eyes dilated, her nose flaring. Like she could smell something, that there was something that out there. I opened the door and looked out into the darkness. Nothing. You could hear the wind through the trees. Not a bird, not a rustle of any creatures. And I looked out into the darkness, almost like in a trance, trying to figure out what she sees. And in the back of my ear, I just hear her, that slow, steady growl. And all of a sudden, crack. Something breaking some kind of twig. Ooh, I don't know what happened. I just my dog is getting the best of me. I shut the door and just chalk it up to dogs being a dog. We let her out again, and she wanted right back in. And she went to the bathroom on our porch, which is very not like her at all. We gave her some food, and for about an hour, she kept pacing, growling and barking. Mm-hmm. She wasn't even barking at the windows or looking outside. She just paced back and forth near the front door. This is kind of weird and was freaking me out a lot. I've loved this dog, and we've gone on so many adventures, whether it was coon hunting, running up and down into the brooks. This dog I grew up with, coon hunting. I've never seen her act like this before. Mm-hmm. This kind of is weird for me, and I shrugged it off, and then she finally settled down to sleep in my parents' bedroom. About 20 minutes later, I'm on the couch reading by the window with my cat when I hear something outside. An animal, maybe? I only hear it take a few steps. It sounded large. Crunch. Crunch. Like you could feel its mass outside on the other side of the wall. I figured it had to be a deer. But then all of a sudden my cat jumped up and acted super intense. It was looking outside, pacing up and down the windowsill and peering out there into the darkness. Then after a few minutes, the screen of the window furthest from me across the room started to shake violently. It heard like something was pushing against the wall. Like something was starting to push down the side of the house. Again, these windows span the whole wall. It startled me, and I looked over. I couldn't make anything out in the darkness or see what it was outside. All I heard was this weird, guttural scream. Then it started shaking, and the banging, it grew even more violent, and the windows next to me started shaking too. My cat freaked out and ran out from the house. And at this point, I was really scared, and I literally closed my eyes and threw blankets over my head and waited for it to stop.
That's what I would have done.
The shaking, the banging lasted for several more seconds. I remember being taken aback at how much force seemed to be behind it. I just couldn't bring myself to look. I had an awful feeling, and I think it took like a couple of seconds, but it was honestly, it could have been longer. I don't know. My skin was crawling, and all of a sudden it stopped. I busted down into my parents' room to ask to see if they heard it, but they were already up and met me at the door.
Oh, they did.
They asked, "What the hell were you doing out there?" We could feel this in the other room, and Daisy was freaking out. My dad picked up the shotgun, and we both ran outside. There was nothing out there, but massive claw marks on the side of the wall.
Ooh.
My dad, in a cold sweat, we ran down to the barn area to look at our sheep.
They have sheep.
Out of the 6 ewes that we had, only 3 were okay. We couldn't find the rest of them.
What?
The ram was gone.
Half of their sheep are gone?
My dad, pissed that maybe it was the neighbors, the other clan that was on the other side of the holler. He grabbed the gun and we all went down into the woods to look for it. Daisy wouldn't leave the house. We asked her to come with us, but she hid underneath my parents' bed.
Yeah.
We continued down one of these paths where we started to see chunks of fur and blood.
Uh-oh.
I got to it. We separated at a clearing. My dad went towards the river, heading towards Bobby Joe's house? Bobby Bowden. I'm going to say Bobby Bowden. I'm going to go Bobby Bowden. Going to Bobby Bowden's house. I went the other way. As I pushed through the clearing, I heard it crunching.
Yeah.
Crunching on bones. It was about 6 feet long with scales, massive red eyes, and wings. It turned and looked at me. I pointed my shotgun right at it, but I was staring into its red, beady eyes, and I couldn't move. I was shaking too hard. It had the body of a dragon,
Ooh.
but it had like feathers, and it had the beak of like an eel. I stared into its eyes, almost like it was like fixated on me, like a hawk would on a mouse, with blood dripping down its snout, its talons, with remains of shards of the sheep everywhere. It let out this guttural scream, and with 2 pumps of its massive wings, it flew off into the night. At that point, I unloaded both barrels into the sky, but then I dropped down to both knees, shaking and vomiting with what I saw. This is what was pushing on the house? This is what took all the sheep? My dad came by, seeing me in an utter mess, and asked, "What the hell's going on? Did you
You're
shoot
effed."
one of the sheep?
No.
Where did it go?" I described to him what I saw, and he went absolutely pale. "Get back to the house now." "Dad, what about get back to the house?" We got back in, and he told us about the myth of this Snallygaster, this creature of the Appalachian mountains that comes out at night.
Yeah.
And that was the tale of It Comes at Night.
I love that he saw the creature. I feel like so many stories we read, it's so often it's just left up to your imagination and there's no actual description of what was bad.
Well, guys, thank you so much for this tale. I know I put a little bit too much research into this because I could be doing like other
It was
things.
a long one.
Yeah, I could be looking for a job or getting
Oh,
ready for the semester. But
Nah.
honestly, I enjoyed this. I enjoyed the cultural element of it because it really like brings it together to where like if you just told like this story,
Right.
it doesn't have the potency as when you like add all the context and layers to it. It's like, oh
Exactly.
wow, there's a lot of mythology
We
here.
definitely
built.
need to do this more often.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Hopefully we do. Patreon guys will be ready in the next 2 weeks. More information about that to come.
February.
I'm thinking what we'll do is our next live stream we do, whenever that is, we'll probably announce the Patreon. That way we can kind of talk to our friends about it and stuff. Like
Yeah.
basically our 3 friends, which would be Tess, Carol Ann, and Linda. You know who you are. We love all you. But yeah, this was week 25, guys. Week 25 in the books. Hey,
Yeah.
we are close to our goal, which is a year, 6 months away from a year. So we are doing a thing. We really are.
Yeah, we
But-
are. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We really appreciate all of your listening,
Week
support,
25 is in the books.
feedback. Hit us up if you got any ghost stories.
Yes,
We'd love to
please.
hear from you or any drink recommendations.
This was Spirits and Ghost Stories. Bye, guys.
Bye.